The Vought F4U Corsair was a highly advanced American fighter aircraft that served prominently during World War II and the Korean War. Originally designed and built by Chance Vought, the aircraft's exceptional performance led to high demand, prompting additional production by Goodyear designated FGAs and Brewster designated F4A. Developed primarily for carrier-based operations, the Corsair entered large-scale service with both the U.S. Navy and U.S. Marine Corps. It quickly proved to be one of the most powerful and effective carrier-based fighter bombers of the war. Many Japanese pilots considered it the most formidable American aircraft, while U.S. naval aviators achieved an impressive 11-1 kill ratio against enemy fighters, despite its power. Early issues with carrier landings and maintenance logistics meant that the Grumman F-6F Hellcat temporarily overshadowed it as the Navy's primary carrier fighter. As a result, the Corsair initially saw combat with land-based Marine and Navy squadrons before later becoming fully integrated into carrier operations. During the Korean War, the Corsair primarily served as a fighter bomber, also seeing action in the French colonial wars in Indochina and Algeria. Beyond U.S. service, it was flown by the Royal Navy's Fleet Air Arm, the Royal New Zealand Air Force, French Naval Aviation, and several other nations, remaining in use into the 1960s. From its first prototype delivery in 1940 to its final production in 1953, a total of 12 571 Corsairs were built across 16 variants. Its 11-year production run stands as the longest of any U.S. piston-engine fighter aircraft. Development in February 1938, the U.S. Navy Bureau of Aeronautics issued 2 requests for proposals, one for a twin-engine fighter and another for a single-engine fighter. For the latter, the Navy demanded the highest possible speed, a stalling speed no greater than 70 mph 710 km, and a range of at least 1,000 miles 1,600 km. The aircraft was to be equipped with 4 machine guns, or 3 with extra ammunition capacity, and designed to carry small anti-aircraft bombs under its wings. Intended to be dropped on enemy formations, reflecting pre-war tactical thinking, by June 1938, the Navy had signed a contract with Chance Vought to develop a prototype designated V-1sin6B, later known as the X4U-1 Zabuno 1443. The Corsair's design team was led by Rex Bazell, and construction began after a mock-up inspection in February 1939. The aircraft was powered by the experimental Pratt & Whitney XR-2800-4 double WASP, an 18-cylinder, twin-row radial engine producing 1,805 horsepower, a 1,350 kW, the first airframe ever designed around this powerful engine. When completed, the prototype boasted the largest and most powerful engine, the biggest propeller, and possibly the largest wing of any naval fighter at the time. The first flight took place on May 29, 1940, piloted by Lyman A. Bullard Jr. The test proceeded smoothly until a trim tab failure caused by flutter forced an emergency landing. On October 1, 1940, the XF4U-1 made history as the first single-engine U.S. to exceed 400 mi-phase 6040 km, achieving an average speed of 405 mi-phase a 652 km between Stratford and Hartford, Connecticut. Although the Lockheed P-38 Lightning had previously surpassed that speed, the Corsair's achievement for a single-engine aircraft was groundbreaking. Testing showed the prototype had an excellent rate of climb, but also exposed several issues. High-speed dives of up to 150-90 km, damage control surfaces and engine components, while spin recovery proved difficult, requiring the use of an anti-spin parachute. These problems delayed production and forced revisions to Navy performance standards. Meanwhile, reports from the European War suggested that the planned armament, 230 caliber and 250 caliber machine guns, was inadequate. In November 1940, the Navy requested heavier armament, leading to the adoption of 6 50 caliber Browning machine guns, 3 mounted in each wing panel. This upgrade dramatically increased the Corsair's firepower and effectiveness in aerial combat. Formal Navy acceptance trials for the XF4U-1 began in February 1941. A letter of intent was issued on March 3, followed by full production proposal on April 2, and by June 30, 1941, Vought was awarded a contract for 584 F4U-1 Corsairs. The name Corsair was revived from Vought's earlier O2U biplane Scout of the 1920s. The first production F4U-1 made its maiden flight on June 24, 1942, a remarkable feat considering the aircraft's complexity. As a carrier-based fighter, it had to be overbuilt and reinforced to endure the punishing stresses of deck landings, making its rapid development even more impressive. Design engine considerations, the F4U Corsair was built around the most powerful aircraft engine available at the time, the 2,000 horsepower's 1,500 Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double WASP, an 18th-cylinder twin-row radial engine, to harness its full potential. Engineers equipped the aircraft with an exceptionally large Hamilton Standard Hydromatic 3-blade propeller, measuring 13 feet 4 inches (4.06 meters) in diameter. This combination of massive engine power and oversized propeller was key to achieving the Corsair's outstanding speed and performance. Landing gear and wings. To enable the Corsair's folding wings, essential for carrier storage, the design team explored several landing gear configurations. Initially, retracting the main gear rearward seemed logical, but the chosen wing chord made it difficult to design struts long enough to clear the aircraft's massive propeller. The solution was the now iconic inverted gull-wing, which reduced the necessary strut length while maintaining sufficient propeller clearance. This distinctive wing design also allowed the wing fuselage junction to meet at an optimal angle, minimizing drag without the need for bulky fairings. However, the bent wing structure added weight and manufacturing complexity, partially offsetting these aerodynamic gains. The Corsair introduced several aerodynamic and mechanical advancements beyond its contemporaries. It was the first U.S. Navy aircraft to feature landing gear that retracted completely into enclosed wheel wells, improving both aerodynamics and protection. Each oleo strut rotated 90 degrees during retraction, folding neatly into the wing with the wheel on top, while rectangular doors closed flush to maintain a sleek profile. This rotating aft-retracting gear design was similar to that of the Curtiss P-40 and later mirrored in the Grumman F6F Hellcat. The Corsair's oil coolers were cleverly housed within the sharply angled inboard wing sections, adjacent to the supercharger intakes, drawing air through leading edge openings instead of external scoops. The aircraft's aluminum fuselage panels were attached using spot welding, a newly developed method that reduced the number of rivets and improved aerodynamic smoothness. Despite these modern techniques, the Corsair retained some traditional materials. Fabric covering was still used on the outer wing surfaces behind the main spout, as well as the ailerons, elevators, and rudder, while the elevators themselves were made of plywood. Even with its powerful engine and aerodynamic refinement, the Corsair could fly slowly enough for carrier landings, aided by full 50 degrees flap deployment, making it both a high-performance fighter and a capable carrier aircraft. Technical issues due to its advanced design and higher performance compared to earlier Navy fighters. The F4U Corsair faced several technical challenges before it could be fully accepted for carrier operations. One of the biggest hurdles was carrier suitability, which required extensive redesigns to the landing gear, tailwheel, and tailhook systems. Early models, the F4U once, experienced difficulties recovering from spins, as the unique inverted gull wing interfered with elevator control. Additionally, the left wing had a tendency to stall abruptly and drop without warning during slow carrier landings. If a pilot suddenly increased throttle during an aborted landing, the left wing could stall so quickly that the aircraft risked flipping over. This dangerous behavior was eventually corrected with the addition of a 6-inch, 150 mm stall strip on the right wing's leading edge, ensuring both wings stalled simultaneously. Other early trials revealed serious visibility problems. The Corsair's long nose and rearward cockpit placement made it difficult for pilots to see the carrier deck during landings. Moreover, oil from the open cowl flaps often splattered onto the windshield, while the landing gear struts had poor rebound control, causing the aircraft to bounce dangerously upon touchdown. These issues were gradually resolved. The upper cowl flaps were locked closed and replaced with fixed panels to prevent oil spray, and a bleed valve was added to the landing gear hydraulics to smooth landings. Only after solving the stalling and bouncing problems did the Navy consider the Corsair fit for carrier deployment. Meanwhile, the Grumman F6F Hellcat, simpler, more forgiving, and easier to build, entered service as the Navy's standard carrier fighter. Although slightly slower, it was better suited for less experienced pilots. As a result, early Corsairs were assigned to U.S. Marine Corps land-based units, where they excelled in ground attack and fighter roles. The Corsair did not see full carrier service until late 1944, after the British Fleet Air Arm helped resolve its remaining landing issues. Design modifications. Production versions of the F4U-1 incorporated major improvements over the prototype. The armament was upgraded to 6-wing mounted, 50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, 3 in each outer wing panel, with 400 rounds for the inner guns and 375 for the outer ones. Because this layout occupied the former space for fuel tanks, a new 237-gallon 8097L self-sealing fuel tank was installed ahead of the cockpit, shifting the aircraft's center of gravity. To compensate, the cockpit was moved back 32 inches at entredon and the fuselage lengthened. Later Corsair variants featured additional configurations. While most retained the 650 caliber setup, the F4U-1C carried 420 mm cannons, though only about 200 units of this version were built. The Corsair could also carry up to 8 rockets of 4 under each wing or 4,000 pounds of bombs, making it a highly effective fighter bomber for ground support missions. Armor protection was also enhanced with 150 pounds or 68 kgs of plating, a 1.5-inch 38mm bullet-resistant windscreen, and a jettisonable canopy for emergencies. Additional transparent panels were added behind the pilot's headrest for limited rearward visibility, while a rectangular viewing window beneath the cockpit aided carrier landings. The Corsair was powered by the improved Pratt & Whitney R2808 Double Wasp engine, rated at 2,000 horsepower 1,500 core. Nakia slotted flaps replaced the earlier designs, and ailerons were enlarged to improve roll rate. IFF's identification friend or FOI transponders were added to the rear fuselage. These upgrades increased the aircraft's overall weight by several hundred pounds, but significantly enhanced its performance and versatility. Performance. The Corsair's performance was exceptional for its time. The F4U-1 was notably faster than the Grumman F6F Hellcat, and only about 13 mph 21 km/h slower than the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, despite all three being powered by the same R2800 engine. While the P-47 achieved its top speed of 30-20 feet 950 mph thanks to an intercooled turbocharger, the Corsair reached its maximum speed at 19th 900 feet 600 mph using a mechanical supercharger. Despite this difference, the F4U remained one of the fastest and most capable carrier-based fighters of World War II, combining speed, firepower, and ruggedness in a way few others could match. Operational history: World War II, U.S. service, Navy testing and transfer to the Marine Corps. The U.S. Navy received its first production F4U-1 Corsair on July 31, 1942. But integrating the aircraft into service proved challenging. The early barred cage canopy offered poor visibility for carrier deck operations, while the aircraft's long nose and high stance made it difficult for pilots to see forward during taxiing or landing approaches. Combined with the massive torque of the Pratt & Whitney Double Wasp engine, the Corsair was notoriously difficult to handle, especially for inexperienced aviators who might need to execute a bolter, missed landing. These difficulties earned it nicknames such as Hog, Hosenose, and Bent Wing Widowmaker. Carrier qualification trials were conducted aboard the training carrier USS Wolverine, the escort carriers USS Core and USS Charger in 1942. Despite its quirks, Navy evaluators concluded that the Corsair was an excellent carrier type and very easy to land aboard. It is no different than any other airplane. Two Navy fighter squadrons, VF-12 October 1942 and later VF-17 April 1943, were equipped with the new aircraft, and by April 1943, VF-12 successfully completed its deck landing qualifications. At the same time, the Navy was introducing the Grumman FCF Hellcat, which, although slower than the Corsair, was easier to land on carriers and better suited for less experienced pilots. As a result, the Corsair was declared combat ready at the end of 1942, but was initially restricted to land-based operations until all carrier qualification issues were resolved. VF-17 briefly embarked on the USS Bunker Hill in late 1943, and the Chief of Naval Operations hoped to have 4 carrier air groups equipped with Corsairs by the end of that year. However, the Commander of Air Forces, Pacific, disagreed, arguing that logistics would be simpler if Corsairs were assigned to the Marine Corps while Hellcats equipped Navy carrier squadrons. Consequently, VF-12 transferred its Corsairs to Marine units, and VF-17, though retaining its aircraft, was removed from the Bunker Hill due to the difficulty of maintaining and supplying the new fighter at sea. For the U.S. Marine Corps, the Corsair arrived at exactly the right time. The Marines urgently needed a superior replacement for the aging F-4F Wildcat, and since they primarily operated from land bases, carrier landing difficulties were less of a concern. Despite early challenges, Marine pilots quickly embraced the Corsair's power, speed, and ruggedness, making it one of the most effective fighters in the Pacific theater. ChatGPT can make mistakes. Check him. Marine Corps combat operations from February 1943 onward. The F4U Corsair began its combat service with the U.S. Marine Corps, operating from Guadalcanal and other bases in the Solomon Islands. The first squadron to deploy the new fighter, VMF-124, led by Major William E. Geiss, arrived at Henderson Field, codenamed Cactus, on the 12th of February 1943. Their first combat mission came just 2 days later, when Corsairs escorted B-24 Liberators on a bombing raid against the Japanese airfield at Kahili, supported by P-38s and P-40s. The engagement turned disastrous for the Americans, losing 4 P-38s, 2 P-40s, 2 Corsairs, and 2 Liberators, while only 4 Japanese Zeros were confirmed destroyed. One of the kills was credited to a Corsair after a mid-air collision. This costly debut became known as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Despite that rough beginning, Marine pilots quickly learned how to unleash the Corsair's full potential. By May 1943, Corsair squadrons had turned the tide, establishing air superiority over Japanese forces. During this period, VMF-124 produced the first Corsair ace, Second Lieutenant Kenneth A. Walsh, who would go on to score 21 aerial victories in the Pacific. Walsh later reflected, "Altitude was everything. Whoever held the higher ground dictated the battle, and the Zero pilot could do nothing to change that. The Corsair outperformed the Zero in every way except at slow speeds, so we made sure never to fight slow." He admitted to being shot down 3 times and losing 5 aircraft in combat, but his aggressive tactics made him one of the top Marine aces of the war. Expanding Marine operations, VMF-113, activated on the 1st of January 1943 at Marine Corps Air Station Il Toro, received a full complement of 24 Corsairs. Their first major success came on the 26th of March 1944, when they escorted B-25 bombers over Ponape and downed 8 Japanese aircraft. In April, they supported the Ujilang landings, and afterward continued striking Japanese positions across the Marshall Islands for the rest of the year. The Corsair soon became the symbol of marine aviation. The legendary Black Sheep Squadron, a VMF-24FUV commanded by Major Gregory Boyington, operated Corsairs across the Solomon Islands, an area known as the Slot. Boyington achieved 22 kills in F4U Corsair and 28 total, including earlier service with the Flying Tigers. Other top Corsair pilots included Kenneth Walsh, James E. Sweat, Archie Donahue, Bill Casey, Case, Robert M. Hanson, Donald Aldrich, Tommy Blackburn, Roger Hedrick, and Ira Kepford. Night fighter versions of the Corsair also entered service, equipping both Navy and Marine units for nighttime intercept missions. Remarkable feats. One of the most extraordinary Corsair victories occurred during the Battle of Okinawa. Lieutenant R.R. Klingman of VMF-312's the Checkerboards engaged a Japanese twin-engine aircraft at high altitude. When his guns jammed due to freezing temperatures, he deliberately rammed the enemy, slicing off its tail with his propeller. Despite losing 5 inches from each blade, Klingman managed to land safely and was later awarded the Navy Cross for his daring action. By the final months of World War II, Marine Corsairs were battling kamikaze attacks from both land bases on Okinawa and fleet carriers at sea. Squadrons such as VMF-312, VMF-323, and VMF-224 played key roles in securing air dominance during the campaign. Land-based modifications while awaiting full carrier approval, many Corsairs were adapted for permanent land use. A total of 965 FG-1A Corsairs were produced without hydraulic wing folding systems, reducing weight and mechanical complexity, though the wings could still be folded manually when needed. In December 1943, the U.S. Bureau of Aeronautics authorized further weight reduction modifications for land-based F4U-1, FG-1 and F3A variants. Squadrons removed catapult hooks, arresting gear, and related hardware, saving around 48 pounds per aircraft. Photographic evidence from the Pacific confirms that many island-based Corsairs, including those operated by the Royal New Zealand Air Force, RNZAF, flew without tailhooks installed, since they had no need for carrier recovery equipment. Fighter-bomber role. The F4U Corsair proved to be more than just a formidable air superiority fighter. It also excelled as a fighter-bomber, playing a crucial role in the Central Pacific and Philippine campaigns. By early 1944, U.S. Marine Corps pilots were harnessing the Corsair's impressive power and durability in close air support missions during amphibious landings. One of the most remarkable contributors to the aircraft's evolving attack role was Charles Lindbergh, serving as a civilian technical advisor for United Aircraft Corporation. Lindbergh flew combat missions with Marine squadrons to determine how to extend the Corsair's range and increase its payload capacity for ground attack operations, as well as to assess the future of single-engine versus twin-engine fighter design for Vought. In a series of daring test flights, Lindbergh managed to lift a Corsair carrying an astonishing 4,000 pounds 1,800 kg of ordnance, a 2,000 pound 900 kg bomb on the centerline and 1,000 pound 450 kg bombs under each wing. He even used these heavily loaded Corsairs to strike Japanese positions in the Marshall Islands, proving the aircraft's incredible versatility and ruggedness in combat. By 1945, the Corsair had fully evolved into a true mud fighter, a powerful strike aircraft capable of deploying high-explosive bombs, napalm tanks, and HVAR rockets. It could even carry advanced ordnance such as backglide bombs and the massive 11.75-inch 298-mun Tiny Tim rockets. The Corsair played a prominent role in the battles for the Palaus, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, earning a reputation as one of the most effective fighter bombers of the Pacific War. Navy service and carrier qualification. The U.S. Navy's relationship with the Corsair evolved more gradually. In November 1943, VF-17, operating from shore bases in the Solomon Islands, reinstalled the Corsair's tailhooks so their aircraft could land and refuel aboard carriers while providing air cover for the Rabaul raid. On 11th November 1943, VF-17 pilots successfully landed, refueled, and launched from USS Bunker Hill and USS Essex, proving the aircraft's carrier potential. Although U.S. Marine squadrons such as VMF-124 had already been flying Corsairs from Henderson Field since early 1943, the U.S. Navy did not see combat with the aircraft until September 1943. Interestingly, it was the Royal Navy's Fleet Air Arm that first qualified the Corsair for carrier operations, pioneering the landing techniques and modifications that the U.S. Navy would later adopt. By April 1944, after the installation of a longer oleo strut to eliminate its notorious bounce during landings, the U.S. Navy officially approved the Corsair for full carrier operations. The first Marine squadrons to deploy aboard carriers were VMF-124 and VMF-213, joining the USS Essex in December 1944. As kamikaze attacks intensified late in the war, the Navy rapidly transferred more Corsair units to carrier duty to strengthen fleet defense. The Corsair's speed, firepower, and rugged design made it an ideal platform for both air defense and ground attack operations from sea. Sorties, and losses. By the end of World War II, U.S. records showed that the F4U and FG Corsair had flown 64,051 combat sorties, representing 44% of all U.S. Navy and Marine Corps fighter missions during the war. Of these, only 9,581 sorties, 15%, were flown from carrier decks. Corsair pilots claimed an impressive 240 aerial victories against just 189 air-to-air losses, giving the aircraft a kill ratio exceeding 11:1, one of the best of the entire conflict. This figure partly reflected the shifting nature of the war. As the Corsair transitioned to a fighter-bomber role later in the Pacific campaign, it faced fewer enemy aircraft compared to earlier years. Against Japan's top fighters, the Corsair achieved extraordinary results, a 12:1 kill ratio versus the Mitsubishi A6M0 and 6:1 against the Makajima Ki-84 Kawanishi MK-J and Mitsubishi J2M combined during the final year of the war. In its ground attack role, the Corsair carried the heaviest bomb load of any U.S. fighter in the Pacific, dropping 15 621 Schuss or 41 metric tons of ordnance, 70% of all bombs delivered by U.S. fighters during World War II. Royal Navy service enhancing carrier suitability. At the outset of World War II, the Royal Navy's Fleet Air Arm, FAA, relied on outdated two-seat fighter concepts such as the Blackburn Squaw and Fairey Fulmar, designed under the assumption that naval fighters would mainly intercept long-range bombers or flying boats, aircraft that didn't demand extreme agility. It was also believed that carrier-based navigation over open oceans required a second crewman to act as radio operator and navigator. However, as the war intensified, these assumptions quickly collapsed. The Royal Navy urgently adopted single-seat fighters like the Hawker Sea Hurricane and the Supermarine Seafire, which, though fast and agile, lacked the endurance and toughness required for extended carrier operations. When the Vought F4U Corsair became available, it was hailed as a powerful and durable solution to these shortcomings, combining speed, range, and survivability in one airframe. In November 1943, the Royal Navy received its first batch of 95 Vought F4U Corsairs, officially designated Corsair Menkai. Training squadrons were formed on the U.S. East Coast, and soon after, the aircraft began operating from British carriers. Early experiences were rough. The Corsair's landing characteristics were unforgiving, and several fatal accidents occurred. Yet, despite its challenges, British pilots regarded the Corsair as the most capable fighter available for carrier service. Because many British carriers had lower hangar deck ceilings than their American counterparts, the FAA modified their Corsairs by clipping 8 inches 200 mm from each wingtip. This not only allowed the aircraft to fit below deck, but also improved its sink rate on approach, reducing the Corsair's tendency to float before touchdown. The Royal Navy also introduced several key modifications to make the Corsair safer and more manageable at sea. These included a bulged canopy, similar to the Malcolm hood, for improved visibility, raising the pilot's seat by 7 inches 180 mm, sealing the upper cowl flaps to prevent oil and hydraulic fluid from splattering the windscreen, adopting the curved landing approach already used for the Seafire, keeping the flight deck in view until the final moments of landing. These practical innovations would later be adopted by the US Navy, helping to make the Corsair a true carrier aircraft. Deployment and combat operations. The Royal Navy received Corsairs from all 3 American manufacturers, Vought, Goodyear, and Brewster, and designated them by mark numbers US. Model British designation F4U birdcage canopy, Corsair MK 95 first batch from Vought F4U 1Ds Banana P, Corsair MK 2510 final 150 were 1Ds F3A1D Brewster built Corsair MK Enveltron F450 over half of Brewster's induction U1D, Goodyear and MK AN57 and widely used in combat IV variants saw active combat. In total, the United Kingdom received 2 012 Corsairs, a significant portion of Allied production. Remarkably, the Royal Navy cleared the Corsair for carrier service well before the US Navy, proving through experience that the aircraft could be operated successfully even from escort carriers. Though not without wear and tear, the Corsair's heavy airframe and high landing speeds caused rapid wear on arrestor cables, but FAA pilots learned to adapt, often landing with precision and confidence under challenging conditions. Fleet Air Arm squadrons were trained and organized in the United States, typically at Quonset Point or Brunswick, before being shipped to combat zones aboard escort carriers. The first of these was 1830 Naval Air Squadron, established on the 1st of June 1943, which later operated from HMS Illustrious. By the end of the war, 18 FAA squadrons were flying Corsairs in combat theaters around the world. In Europe, British Corsairs participated in several key strikes against the German battleship Tirpitz during Operation Tungsten in April, July, and August 1944. Operating from HMS Victorious and HMS Formidable, Corsairs provided fighter cover for the attacking Barracuda dive bombers, ensuring the success of the raids. Though they encountered no enemy fighters, these operations demonstrated the FAA's growing mastery of carrier-based air power. Pacific and final missions. By April 1944, British Corsairs had joined the British Pacific Fleet, participating in major Allied operations across Southeast Asia. Their combat debut in the region came during Operation Cockpit, a large-scale raid on Japanese positions at Sabang Island in the Dutch East Indies. As the war neared its end, Corsairs flew directly over Japanese home islands in July and August 1945. Squadrons 1834, 1836, 1841, and 1842 conducted strikes on the Tokyo area from the decks of HMS Victorious and HMS Formidable. On 9 August 1945, just days before Japan's surrender, Lieutenant Robert Hampton Gray, a Royal Canadian Navy volunteer reserve pilot with 1841 Squadron, led a low-level attack on Shiogama Harbor. Despite being hit by anti-aircraft fire, he pressed his attack and destroyed the Japanese destroyer Amakusa with a one-loaded .450 cruise bomb before crashing into the sea. For his extraordinary bravery, Gray was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross, Canada's last of World War II, and one of the few ever awarded to a naval aviator. His sacrifice marked not only the final Canadian casualty of the war, but also the Corsair's closing chapter as a symbol of Allied courage and innovation in naval aviation. Royal Navy and Royal New Zealand Air Force operations, camouflage and markings. Early Fleet Air Arm. FAA Corsairs were painted in a camouflage pattern featuring dark slate, grey and extra dark sea grey on the upper surfaces with sky undersides. Later in the war, these were replaced with a more practical overall dark blue scheme. During the Pacific Campaign, all Allied aircraft were required to remove red elements from their insignia to avoid confusion with Japanese aircraft, which bore the bright red Hinamaru Metball marking. As a result, the US Navy removed the red center from its roundels and deleted the red stripes from its tail markings by May 1942. The Royal Navy followed suit, initially painting over the red center of their Type C roundels with white, later replacing it with slate grey. When the US introduced white sidebars to their insignia in June 1943. Many British Corsairs operating in the Southeast Asia Command CA's theatre adopted a similar design, adding white bars to their blue and white roundels to maintain consistency with American aircraft. Of the 18 carrier-based FAA Corsair squadrons, 8 saw combat, carrying out extensive ground, attack and interdiction missions and claiming 47.5 enemy aircraft destroyed in air combat. At the end of World War II, under the Lend-Lease Agreement, the Royal Navy was required to either pay for or return the aircraft supplied by the United States. Lacking the funds to purchase them, most of the remaining Corsairs were disposed of at sea, pushed overboard into Moreton Bay, near Brisbane, Australia. Royal New Zealand Air Force, initially flying obsolete Curtiss P-40s, the Royal New Zealand Air Force RNZAF had proven itself highly capable in the South Pacific, particularly in air-to-air engagements. Recognizing this, the United States government provided New Zealand with access to the F4U Corsair earlier than most Allied nations, especially since the aircraft was not yet fully carrier qualified. As the Pacific War advanced northward, RNZAF operations shifted from the U.S. Army Air Force's zone to the U.S. Navy's operational area under Admiral Chester Nimitz. To align with Navy logistics and supply systems, replacing the P-40 with the Corsair became essential. In total, 424 Corsairs were supplied to equip 13 RNZF squadrons, including No. 14 Squadron and No. 15 Squadron, replacing both Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers and Curtiss P-40 fighters. Most of the F4U Corsairs were assembled by Unit 60, with additional aircraft assembled and tested at RNZF Station Hobsonville. Altogether, the RNZF operated 3 U-36 F4U-1s, 41 F4U-1Ds and 60 FG-1Ds, the latter arriving late in the war. These aircraft played a vital role in supporting Allied operations across the Pacific, providing both air superiority and ground support as New Zealand's contribution to the final stages of the conflict. Royal New Zealand Air Force Service. The first Lend-Lease F4U Corsairs arrived for the Royal New Zealand Air Force, RNZF, in March 1944. When 30F reached the base depot workshops, Unit 60 on Espiritu Santo in the New Hebrides. By April 1944, Unit 60 had become the central hub for assembling all Corsairs destined for RNZF squadrons operating in the Southwest Pacific. A test and dispatch flight was soon established to ensure each aircraft was properly tested before entering service. Within just 3 months, by June 1944, 100 Corsairs had been assembled and test flown. The first RNZF units to operate the Corsair were No. 20 and No. 21 squadrons, both based on Espiritu Santo, and they became operational in May 1944. The RNZF's organizational system in the Pacific was unique. Each squadron consisted primarily of pilots and a small command staff, up to 27 pilots in total, while servicing units, SUs handled maintenance and ground operations. Each SU, composed of around 5-6 officers, 57 NCOs and 2 HUV airmen, were stationed at fixed locations. For example, FOU-1 NZ-3 Thunteen was first assigned a 20 squadron to Funsu on Guadalcanal in May 1944, before being transferred with its unit to Tuusu on Bougainville in November of that year. In total, the RNZAF maintained 10 front-line servicing units and 3 additional units based in New Zealand. Because each SU applied its own markings and repainted aircraft as needed, RNZAF Corsairs often displayed a wide variety of color schemes and insignia, making them less uniform than their US Navy or Royal Navy counterparts. By late 1944, the Corsair had completely replaced older fighters, equipping all 10 Pacific-based RNZF fighter squadrons. However, by that time, the air war in the South Pacific had largely subsided, with few Japanese aircraft remaining in their area of operations. RNZAF Corsair pilots focused mainly on ground attack missions in support of Allied ground forces, including American, Australian, and New Zealand troops. At the end of World War II, most RNZAF Corsair squadrons were disbanded. Only No. 14 Squadron remained active. In March 1946, this unit, equipped with new Goodyear-built FG-1D Corsairs, was deployed to Iwakuni, Japan, as part of the British Commonwealth Occupation Force. The Corsair continued in RNZAF service until its retirement in 1947. Out of the 437 Corsairs supplied to New Zealand, only one remains airworthy today. FG-1D N6FV8 civilian registration ZK car, owned by the Old Stick and Rudder Company in Masterton, New Zealand, captured Corsairs on 18 July 1944. A British Corsair serial JT-04 from 1841 Naval Air Squadron operating off HMS Formidable was forced to make an emergency landing in a field in Hamari, Norway, while returning from an anti-submarine patrol after the Operation Mascot raid on the German battleship Tirpitz. The pilot, Lieutenant Matherley, was captured, and the aircraft, still largely undamaged, was seized by German forces. Unable to determine how to fold the wings for transport, German personnel ferried the Corsair by boat to Narvik and later to Germany, where it was listed among captured enemy aircraft, Butterflugzeug, and sent to Eprabungstellrecklen, the Luftwaffe's main test and evaluation center. This was likely the only Corsair captured by the Germans during the war. In 1945, US forces discovered a captured Corsair near Kasumigara Flight School in Japan. The Japanese had repaired the aircraft using fabric patches and parts salvaged from other wrecks, suggesting they had captured two force-landed F4Us late in the war, one of which may have been flown in limited testing by Japanese engineers. Korean War service. During the Korean War, the Corsair was primarily employed in the close air support role, providing ground attack capabilities for United Nations forces. To meet these demands, the AU-1 Corsair was developed from the F4U-5 as a dedicated low-altitude ground attack variant. It used a single-stage, manually controlled supercharger in its Pratt & Whitney R2800-83W engine, unlike the two-stage automatic supercharger of the F4U-5, optimizing performance. Other Corsair models used in Korea from 1950 to 1953 include AB F4U-4B, 4P, F4U-5N, and F4U-5NL. Early in the war, Corsairs occasionally engaged in dogfights with Soviet-built Yakovlev Yak-9 fighters. However, the introduction of the MiG-15 jet quickly outclassed the Corsair in speed and altitude. One notable engagement occurred on the 10th of September 1952, when Marine Captain Jesse G. Folmar engaged a MiG-15 in a turning battle, successfully shooting it down with his 420 Memriv cannons, only to be shot down himself moments later. Folmar survived after bailing out and being rescued with minimal injuries. Night operations were also significant for the Corsair. The F4U-5N and 5NL night fighters attacked enemy supply lines, including trucks and trains, and intercepted low-flying harassment aircraft such as the Polikarpov Po-2, Becek Charlies. Operations were often coordinated with C-47 flare ships, which dropped thousands of 1000 candle-power magnesium flares to illuminate targets. U.S. Navy detachments of F4U-5Ns were posted to shore bases for these missions. One remarkable pilot, Lieutenant Guy Bordelon of VC-3 Detachment D aboard USS Princeton, became the Navy's only Korean War ace flying a piston-engine aircraft, credited with 5 kills, 3 Lavochkin Lines and 2 Yak-18s between 29 June and 17 July 1952. Navy and Marine Corsairs were credited with 12 enemy aircraft destroyed during the conflict. Corsairs in Korea employed a variety of weapons, including cannons, napalm tanks, conventional bombs, and unguided rockets. The standard 5-inch HVAR rockets were effective, though heavily armored Soviet vehicles sometimes required the 6.5-inch anti-tank aircraft rocket ATAR. The 11-inch Tiny Tim rockets were also occasionally used in pairs under the fuselage. A notable act of heroism involved Lieutenant Thomas J. Hudner, Jr. Flying an F4U-4 of VF-32 from USS Leyte, he crash-landed his Corsair in an attempt to rescue Ensign Jesse L. Brown, the first African-American naval aviator, whose aircraft had been downed near Changjin. Although Brown did not survive, Hudner was awarded the Medal of Honor for his courageous actions. A Ronavol service. After World War II, the French Navy A. Ronavalot faced an urgent need for a modern carrier-based close air support aircraft to operate from the 4 aircraft carriers it had acquired, 2 from the US Navy and 2 from the Royal Navy. Until a suitable replacement was available, the French relied on second-hand Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers, Grumman F6 F5 Hellcats, and Curtiss SB-2C Helldivers to support ground forces during the First Indochina War, but a more capable aircraft was required. First Indochina War, the final production variant of the Corsair, the F4U-7, was built specifically for the French Navy. The X4U-7 prototype first flew on the 2 July 1952, and a total of 94 FU-7s were produced, 79 in 1952, 15 in 1953, making it the last Corsair ever built. These aircraft were technically purchased by the US Navy and transferred to France under the US Military Assistance Program, MEMAP. The F4U-7s were deployed during the latter stages of the First Indochina War with flotillas 12 F-14F and 15 Bon F, supplemented by at least 25 XUMC AU-FOS delivered in 1954 after the Korean War. On the 15th of January 1953, Flotille 42F at Karaba Air Base, Tunisia, became the first French unit to receive the F4U-7. By 17 April 1954, the unit had arrived in Da Nang, Vietnam, although initially without aircraft. The following day, delivered 25 AU-1 Corsairs formerly flown by VM-212. Over the next 3 months, French Corsairs flew 959 combat sorties totaling 335 flight hours, dropping approximately 700 tons of bombs, firing over 300 rockets, and expending 70,000 rounds of 20 mm of ammunition. 6 aircraft were damaged, and 2 were shot down by Viet Minh forces. By September 1954, the F4U-7s were loaded onto the carrier Dixmude and returned to France in November, while the surviving AU-1s were returned to the U.S. Navy via the Philippines. Flotille 50F returned to South Vietnam in 1956 equipped with 4U-7 Corsairs. Suez Crisis. During the Suez Crisis, Operation Musketeer October 1956, the 14 PLEF and 15 BEF flotillas participated alongside British and Israeli forces. Corsairs were marked with yellow and black recognition stripes for identification. Their mission was to strike Egyptian Navy targets at Alexandria, though U.S. naval presence limited success. On 3 November 1956, 16 F4U-7s attacked airfields in the Nile Delta, losing 1 aircraft to anti-aircraft fire and damaging 2 more upon landing. In total, Corsairs expended 25 tons of bombs, over 500 rockets, and 16,000 rounds of 20 mm ammunition. Algerian War. Following Operation Musketeer, all 3 Corsair flotillas relocated to Tlergma and Oran airfields in Algeria, providing close air support, KES and helicopter escort. Flotille 17F was established at High-Riz in April 1958. French F4U-7 Corsairs, along with some AU-1s, flew missions during the Algerian War 1955-1962. Between February and March 1958, several SAS missions were launched from Bois-Belleau, the only carrier involved in the conflict. The F4U-7 thus served as a reliable carrier, capable fighter, bomber and ground attack aircraft for the French Navy well into the late 1950s and early 1960s. Tunisia. Although France recognized Tunisian independence in 1956, it continued to maintain military forces at Buzzert and planned to expand the airbase. In 1961, Tunisia demanded the evacuation of the base and imposed a blockade on the 17th of July, aiming to force the French out. This led to a 3-day battle between Tunisian militiamen and French forces. In response, French paratroopers were dropped to reinforce the base, escorted by Corsairs from the 12F and 17F flotillas, while the AA Ronneville conducted over 150 air sorties against Tunisian troops and vehicles between 1921 and July. 3 Corsairs were damaged by ground fire. In early 1959, the AA Ronneville tested the SS-11 wire guided anti-tank missile on F4U-7 Corsairs. Pilots from Flotille 12F were required to manually guide the missile from about 2 kilometers away, using a joystick with their right hand while keeping track of a flare on the missile's tail, and simultaneously piloting the aircraft with their left hand, a challenging task in a single-seat fighter. Although the tests reportedly produced effective results, the missile was not deployed operationally during the Algerian War. By the early 1960s, the A. Ronneville had used 163 Corsairs in total and 94 F4U-7s and 69 AU. The last Corsairs operated by the Cures-based 14F flotilla were retired by September 1964, with some preserved in museums or as civilian warbirds. The introduction of modern jet-powered aircraft aboard the Clemenceau and Foch aircraft carriers marked the end of the Corsair era in French service. Football War. The Corsairs' final combat operations occurred in 1969 during the so-called Football War between Honduras and El Salvador, where both nations operated the aircraft. The conflict, ostensibly sparked by a soccer association football match, saw Captain Fernando Soto of the Honduran Air Force achieve 3 aerial victories on 17th of July 1969. That morning, he shot down a Cavalier Mustang, killing its pilot. In the afternoon, he downed 2 Salvadoran FG-1 Corsairs. 1 pilot may have bailed out, while the second aircraft exploded midair, killing its pilot. These engagements are historically notable as the last recorded aerial combats between propeller-driven aircraft, and made Soto the only pilot credited with 3 kills in an American continental war. El Salvador did not achieve any aerial victories during the conflict. At the beginning of the war, El Salvador reportedly enlisted American pilots with prior P-51 and F-4U experience, including Bob Love, Chuck Lyford, Ben Hall, and Lynn Garrison. Though confirmation of their combat flights remains uncertain, Lynn Garrison had previously acquired a retired F4U-7 and serial 33693 from the French MH in 1964. Registered as N693, and it was later destroyed in a crash in San Diego 1987, legacy entering service in 1942. The Corsair was originally designed as a carrier-based fighter, but its initial carrier operations were challenging. Its left wing could stall before the right, combined with the long nose limiting forward visibility, making deck landings difficult. Consequently, Most early Corsairs were assigned to Marine Corps squadrons operating from land bases, and some early Goodyear-built variants, EFG-1A, were constructed with fixed wings. Despite these initial challenges, Marine pilots embraced the aircraft due to its superior performance compared with contemporary fighters like the Brewster F2A Buffalo and Grumman F4F Wildcat. The Corsair also outperformed Japan's primary fighter, the A6M0. While the Zero had superior low-speed turning ability, the F4U was faster and could outclimb and outdive its opponent. This performance advantage, combined with the Corsair's ability to sustain heavy damage, allowed pilots to place enemy aircraft in the F4U's firing envelope, maximizing the effectiveness of its 6.50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, which carried two 300 rounds, providing just under 30 seconds of continuous fire per gun. Starting in 1943, the Fleet Air Arm (FAA) began receiving Corsairs, which they successfully operated from Royal Navy carriers in combat, both with the British Pacific Fleet and during operations in Norway. These were clipped-wing Corsairs, with each wingtip shortened by 8 inches, 20 cm, to accommodate the lower hangar deck heights of British carriers. The FAA also developed a curved landing approach to address the F4U's landing challenges, improving carrier operations significantly. Infantrymen affectionately dubbed the Corsair the Sweetheart of the Marianas and the Angel of Okinawa for its pivotal support in those campaigns. Among Navy and Marine pilots, it earned nicknames like Ensign Eliminator and Bent Wing Eliminator, reflecting the extensive training required to safely fly the carrier-based fighter. It was also commonly called U-Bird or Bent Wing Bird. While some Allied World War II accounts claimed the Japanese referred to the Corsair as Whistling Death, Japanese sources do not support this. It was primarily known to them as the Sikorsky. The Corsair has been officially designated the State Aircraft of Connecticut, honoring its strong ties to the state's aviation industry, including airframe manufacturer Vought, Sikorsky, engine maker Pratt & Whitney, and propeller manufacturer Hamilton Standard. Variants during World War II, production of the Corsair extended beyond Vought to include models built by Brewster and Goodyear. Allied operators of the aircraft included the Royal Navy's Fleet Air Arm and the Royal New Zealand Air Force. In total, over 12,500 F4Us were produced, spanning 16 distinct variants. F4U-1A mid to late production Corsairs featured a new, taller, and wider canopy with only 2 frames, closely resembling the Malcolm hood used on some British fighters, along with a simplified windscreen. This redesign allowed the semi-elliptical turtledeck flank windows to be eliminated. Internally, manufacturers used the designation F4U-1A to distinguish these from the earlier birdcage variants. The pilot's seat was raised by 7 in 180 mm and combined with a 6 in 150 mm lengthening of the tailwheel strut and the new canopy. This improved forward visibility over the long nose. The under-cockpit bombing window was removed, and a 6 into 150 mm stall strip was added just outboard of the gun ports on the right wing leading edge. Upgraded undercarriage oleo struts reduced bouncing on landing, making the F4U-1A the first Corsair truly capable of carrier operations. British service. The Fleet Air Arm received 360 F4U-1As modified with clipped wings. 200 mm was removed from each wingtip to operate safely from Royal Navy carriers. The Royal Navy had already been flying the Corsair MKI successfully since 4 June 1943 with 1830 Naval Air Squadron aboard HMM Estrius. USMC service. Many U.S. Marine Corps squadrons removed the arrestor hooks. Late F4U-1As were fitted with an experimental R2800AW engine with water injection, which, after successful trials, were adopted more widely. The main fuel tank held 237 US Gals 900 low in front of the cockpit, with 2 additional 62 US Gals 230 low wing tanks. This was the first Corsair capable of carrying a centerline drop tank, extending its maximum ferry range to just over 500 mi to 400 km. 3A1 and F3A1D Corsair Memcafo Fleet Air Arm. These were Brewster-built F4U-1s. Production was plagued by labor disputes, leading the U.S. Navy to cancel Brewster's contract. The company soon folded. Structural problems, particularly poor quality wing fittings, meant these aircraft were red-lined for speed and prohibited from aerobatics after several wings failed. None of the Brewster-built Corsairs reached front-line U.S. units. The Fleet Air Arm received 430 Brewster Corsairs, 334 F3A1 and 96 3A1D, comprising more than half of Brewster's total production. FG-1A and FG-1D Corsair MKIV Fleet Air Arm. These were Goodyear-built Corsairs, produced under license to Vought specifications. The first G1 flew in February 1943 and deliveries began in April 1943. Goodyear produced 407 and FG-1 series aircraft through the end of the war. Ds for the RSF and A-55 Serafil 400 for FG-1, FG-1 457 for G1D for the Royal Navy as Corsair MKIVs. An unofficial post-war designation for F4U funds modified for Fleet Air Arm use. F41C, the F4U-1C prototype, appeared in August 1943 based on the F4U-1. A total of 200 aircraft were built between July and November 1944, developed alongside the F4U-1D, designed for both ground attack and fighter roles. The F-50 caliber machine guns of the F4U-1D with 4 20mm AMN2 cannons each carrying 231 rounds. The F4U-1C entered combat in 1945, notably during the Okinawa campaign, where its heavier 20mm firepower was highly valued. The cannons were considered more effective than 50 caliber guns for most combat roles, though early issues with jamming and freezing at altitudes of 20,000, 30,000 and FAFTA 7609 100 had made some pilots prefer the original 50 calibers. Experience and the eventual installation of gun heaters improved reliability, making the 20 mm cannons competitive with the older armament. Corsair MK Fleet Air Arm introduced in April 1944, the F4U-1D was developed alongside the F4U-1C. WWII engine with water injection boosting power by up to 250 HE 190 kbf and increasing top speed from 14 to 425 mi for 671 to 684 km. Designed to meet the US Navy's growing demand for fighter bombers, the F4U-1D could carry double the rockets of the F4U-1A, mounted on permanent rails, as well as twin pylons for bombs or drop tanks. Although these additions increased drag, the extra fuel in the drop tanks allowed the aircraft to maintain long-range missions even under heavy, non-aerodynamic loads. The single-piece, blown, clear view canopy was introduced as standard on the 1D and became the norm for all later F4U models. The Fleet Air Arm received 150 F4U-1D aircraft, F4U-1P, a rare photo reconnaissance variant of the F4U-1. XF4U-2. The XF4U-2 was a special night fighter variant of the F4U, featuring 2 auxiliary fuel tanks for extended range. The F4U-2 was an experimental conversion of the F4U-1 into a carrier-capable night fighter, armed with 5 50-inch 12.7 mm machine guns. The outboard right gun was removed and fitted with an airborne intercept EIV radar mounted in a radome on the starboard wing. Due to Vought prioritizing other projects, only 32 F4U-1s were converted by the Naval Aircraft Factory, with 2 additional conversions carried out by front-line units. The F4U-2 saw combat operations with VFN-111 aboard U.S. Enterprise and U.S. Intrepid in early 1944, VFN-75 in the Solomon Islands, VM-7532 on Tarawa. XF4U-3. XF4U-3B. The XF4U-3 was an experimental Corsair built to test the aircraft with different engines to evaluate performance across various power plants. This variant never entered operational service. Goodyear contributed several airframes, designated FG-3, to the project. A single sub-variant XF4U-3B with minor modifications was also produced for the Fleet Air Arm FA. The XF4U-4 introduced a new engine and cowling as part of further performance testing. F4U-4. The F4U-4 was the last Corsair variant to see combat in World War II, with deliveries to the US Navy beginning in early 1945. However, of 100 and piloted P-1600 KW-100 dual-stage supercharged engine, which could be boosted to 2 450 HP 1A30 kW with water alcohol injection. To improve maneuverability, unarmored wing fuel tanks 6.2 US GAL-230L were removed, and a nose air scoop was added. The propeller was upgraded to a 4-blade type, feasing the maximum speed to 8 miles per on 21 Dumbenmas and climb rate to a 550 mile 400 mind compared with 2 900 feet and 18A every mind for the F4U-1A. The F4U-4, nicknamed the 4-Hog, retained the original armament and external load capabilities, drop tanks and bombs of the F4U-1D. Vought also tested 2 F4U-4 prototypes, a 463 and 50301 with fixed wingtip tanks and an Aeroproduct 6-blade contraprop, but neither modification was adopted for production. 4B total of 300 F4U-4s were ordered with an alternate armament of 420.79 in AN-M3 cannons instead of the standard 650 caliber machine guns. F4U-4E and F4U-4N developed late in World War II as night fighter variants. These aircraft featured radar radomes projecting from the right wingtip. The F4U-4E was equipped with APS-4 search radar, while the F4U-4N used the APS-6 radar. Many of these aircraft were also refitted with 420mm M2 cannons, similar to the F4U-1C. Although they did not see combat in WWII, these night fighter variants became highly effective during the Korean War. An experimental radio-controlled target drone variant with only 1 unit built, F4U-4P, the photo reconnaissance version of the F4U-4, equivalent to the earlier F4U-1P, and a rare variant, XF4U-5, featured a new engine cowling along with extensive modifications to test performance improvements for subsequent production models. Introduced in 1945 as a refinement of the F4U-4, the F4U-5 incorporated pilot feedback and performance enhancements. It first flew on the 20 December 1945 and featured a more powerful Pratt & Whitney R2800-32 as engine with a two-stage supercharger producing up to 760 HP 2060 kW. Other upgrades included automatic blower controls, cowl flaps, intercooler doors, an oil cooler, spring tabs on elevators and rudder, a modernized cockpit, a fully retractable tail wheel, and heated cannon bays and pitot head. The cowling was lowered 2 degrees for improved forward visibility, and this was the first Corsair variant with all metal wings. 23 units were produced, achieving a maximum speed of 408 knots, 470 mph, and a sea-level climb rate of 480-50 feet per minute. F4U-5 and a radar-equipped night fighter version with 14 units produced. FIFENAL, a winterized variant with 72 units, built. The 29 converted from F4U-5Ns for a total of 01. Equipped with rubber de-icing boots on the leading edges of wings and tail for cold weather operations. F4U-5P, a long-range photo reconnaissance version with 30 units produced. AU-1, the F4U-6, later redesignated AU-1, was a dedicated ground attack variant produced for the U.S. Marine Corps. It featured additional armor to protect the pilot and fuel tank, and the oil coolers were relocated inboard to reduce vulnerability to ground fire. Its supercharger was simplified for low-altitude operations, and extra racks were added for ordnance. Fully loaded for combat, the AU-1 weighed 20% more than the F4U-4 and could carry up to 8 200 lb 300 kg of bombs. Performance varied with load. Albuda to 100 of gallon drop tank 238 at 9 500 feet to 383 km 2 900 Westrevar rockets and 250 gallon drop tanks. 700 F at 480 and fixed on Nazen without external loads, 389 F at 14 Nazen FD as 60 fixed as at 4300 Mi, first produced in 1952. It saw action in the Korean War and was retired in 1957. F4U-7, essentially an AU-1 airframe fitted with the 43W engine. Developed for the French Navy under the Military Assistance Program. FG-1E and FG-Guardia built FG-1 variants, FG-1E equipped with radar for night operations. FG-1. Converted into a radio-controlled drone, FG-3 and FG-3 Turbo supercharged version converted from FG-1D airframes. FG-4 planned Goodyear-built F4U-4 variant, never delivered. AU-1 detailed, a specialized U.S. Marine Corps attack variant with reinforced armor, inboard oil coolers, simplified supercharger, and extra ordnance racks. Load it could carry 8 200 lb 3700 of bombs and perform at speeds ranging from 238 mph fully loaded to 389 mph unloaded. It entered service in 1952. In Korea and retired by 1957. Super Corsair F2G in March 1944. Pratt & Whitney requested an F4U-1 to test their new R4360 Wasp Major, a 28-cylinder, 4-row radial engine. This led to the F2G Corsair series, also known as the F Super Corsair FG, manual folding wings and a 14FT 4.3 MF propeller F2G-2A, hydraulic folding wings, 13FT 4.0 MF propeller, and a carrier arresting hook for carrier operations. F5 pre-production XFG funds were built. 3905, including 2 racing aircraft, Race to Fall and Race City 4 and 5 F2Gs, followed Filer of 5 to Bunos 8Fu54, 8A455, A8456, 8A457's Race 84. Race V7 52 Xus Bunos 884F9, 88463's Race 74. For the last after the war, 5 F2Gs were sold as surplus and became successful racing aircraft. In 1949, only Bunos 88454 and 884F2G Winton and Buno A8463 F2G2 survived today, although the F2G2 was destroyed in a 2012 crash after full restoration.